the Harry and Meghan cellist, one Sheku Kane Mason, has said that Rule Britannia should be banned from the proms because it makes him feel uncomfortable. Really? How sad. Never mind. We'll try and fix all that for you, and we'll have some reassuring words by our expert on British music, particularly on historic British music, Rafe Heydel-Mankoo from the New Culture Forum. Rafe, very nice to see you.
Always a pleasure.
You are, of course, an historian, so we treat you with some respect on this show. Let's kick off, shall we, with a bit of a blast of Rule Britannia. Just have a listen to it. I feel better already.
If that doesn't stiffen the sinews, I don't know what will.
Exactly.
You know?
I mean, before we get on to why on earth anyone would feel uncomfortable about it, tell us a bit about the history of the song.
Yes, well, actually, knowing the history of the song helps you actually understand why this whole debate is so ludicrous.
Right.
Rule Britannia was written in 1740 for a masque about King Alfred the Great,
right.
the 9th century king of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, hundreds of years before any white man set foot in Asia or Africa. So that's the setting of it. But actually, it was also written as a political statement about 18th century Britain. And actually, what it was a celebration of British liberty against European royal tyranny.
Yes.
That's where the slave reference comes in. It was never written with any idea about non-Europeans or about the slave trade.
Well, it very clearly says Britain never, never shall be slaves, which means it's about Britain not being slaves. It's not about slaves. You've got
to understand, at this time, Europe was under the domination of authoritarian tyrants, most famously Louis XIV and so forth.
Well, I mean, it still is, let's face it, under the European Union.
Plus ça change, I can say it in French. And of course, in Britain, we had a much weaker monarchy after the Glorious Revolution. So Parliament was sovereign, and they were looking over at the continent and seeing these Europeans oppressed under the Jacoboot or the Bourbons and the Hohenzollerns and the Tsarist Russia and the Habsburgs. And they said, don't try that with John Bull, matey. We're British, we have our own liberties, we never will be slaves.
I mean, the good thing about those despots was they did build some fantastic and magnificent buildings, though, didn't they?
Well, as was once said,
good as that,
England, where the kings live like dukes and the dukes live like kings.
Yes, absolutely right. So, I mean, so the idea that you would feel uncomfortable, though, listening to such a song without knowing the context of it is typical of the way that we have become in this country, isn't it?
And there's no excuse for ignorance in the age of the internet. This is not a huge topic that requires months of study.
No.
In about 10 minutes, you can actually understand that this has nothing to do with colonialism, nothing to do with empire or the slave trade. And I'm very happy to have a debate on all of those subjects. But it's kind of fundamental that both sides have some degree of knowledge.
You have to have some knowledge,
and that's what's been so frustrating and annoying and depressing about this, is the huge level of ignorance about this, and also the usual race grifters who clearly are being disingenuous about this entire debate.
It's just
another attempt to attack one of our beloved traditions.
Turn everything into some kind of social justice manoeuvre. Let's have a listen to another favourite of mine, Land of Hope and Glory. It brings a tear to the eyes.
I was just going to say, I can feel a tear welling up. It's my favourite melody, often called Britain's second national anthem, also used for graduation ceremonies in America and Canada, because it's such a stonkingly good tune.
It's a great tune.
Composed by Edward Elgar in 1901 as the Pomp and Circumstance March number 1.
Yes.
That's what we hear at the last night of the proms. And part of that is the chorus, which we hear sung there. The lyrics came a year later for the coronation of King Edward VII as part of his coronation ode, also composed by Elgar. Of course, in 1901, of course, we were in the height of Edwardian Britain, right? The empire was great. We were the world's preeminent power. And that's what this actually celebrates.
We just finished up with Queen Victoria's reign, hadn't they?
Exactly. She died in 1901. So this new Edwardian... So you can understand why they'd want to be bombastic and celebrate the fact that they're top dog. Of course, we're no longer top dog, but now what it's actually seen as is something that's almost like make Britain great again.
But it's like a wish, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sing that Land of Hope and Glory as an ode to our history, as an ode to the nation's culture, and wanting it to be like that again.
Lord, who make thee mighty, make thee mightier yet.
Right.
You know? And,
so why can't people get on with that then?
It's a common theme. You know, look at Australia. Their anthem is Advance Australia Fair. It's not that different, you know. Think about Tony Blair. You know, things can only get better. I mean, it's not much.
He was wrong, by the way, about that.
It's a pretty common theme. And what's interesting, you know, is the French Marseillaise anthem. It's a revolutionary, it's a brilliant anthem. I think the best in the world. But it was written at a time of war. It says, kick the foreigners out of France. It says, spill their impure blood. Now, I don't hear many people in France calling for that anthem to be removed. That's far more controversial, I would have thought.
Exactly right. Let's try another one. See how people can manage to get upset by this. Just terrific.
Enough to warm the cockles of any English heart.
I can't praise these songs highly enough.
Well, no one can really criticise Jerusalem, also known as England's national anthem.
Yes.
Because actually, although today we think of it as a patriotic tune, we associate it with the Church of England and with royal occasions. Actually, it's also sung by socialists. The Labour Party sing it. Also, feminists sing it. It's actually, the copyright was held by the Women's Institute for a long time.
Was it?
Because Parry, who composed the music, was also believe in women's suffrage.
Okay.
And he gave it to the women's suffrage movement.
Okay.
And Blake, who wrote the lyrics, was actually an ardent Republican who supported the American and the French revolutions and held views that were opposed to the Church of England. He was one of the first libertine, believing in free love and everything else. So it's a song for everyone in England. So you'll be very hard-pressed to actually find a real reason for critiquing it, unless you're anti-Christian, because, of course, it's all about Jesus coming back to earth, the second coming of Christ, and building in England a new Jerusalem, meaning a new heaven. That's what it really means.
And isn't it played out sometimes at sporting events as well?
Yes, so it's the cricket board play this. Yeah. Rugby used to play Land of Hope and Glory. Now they play now they play Jerusalem. And there's a bit of a battle between Land of Hope and Glory and Jerusalem, because of course the Scots and the Welsh and Irish, they all have their national anthems. The English always play God Save the Queen or the King, usually, right? So there's been a push to have an English separate national anthem. And
of course, the Scots object to God Save the King, don't they? Because of the second verse, which talks about Scotland and in a way that they think is a bit disparaging.
Well, there are about 7 different verses, and we only use 2 or 3 of them at the most, and we don't include that controversial one. But Jacobites also sang that originally.
But Flower of Scotland also has lines in it about, repelling the English and sending them home to think again. Well, so, I mean, we're not allowed to complain about that.
My view has been at sporting events, there should just be one anthem, God Save the King, because all 4 nations, that's their national anthem.
Yes.
That's what I would prefer. But I understand now everyone wants to have their own one.
I mean,
so
Ireland
maybe it's
has 2,
time for England to have its
Ireland play 2 because they've actually got a United Ireland rugby team.
Yeah,
unfortunately, they haven't managed to make that happen in the actual country, but they've managed to do it in the rugby team. But they play both national anthems, don't they? Thank you very much indeed for the history lesson. I hope you've all learned something. And to Mr. Sheku Kane Mason, if you're not watching, you should be. And if you are watching, now you know how you don't have to feel uncomfortable anymore. There. Now go back to playing your cello.